Assalamu alaikum friends. Today in this video we are going to discuss asbestos hazards and control measures. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral fiber that was commonly used in building materials for its strength, heat resistance and insulating properties. However, asbestos is now known to be hazardous to health, particularly when its fibers are released into the air and inhaled. Here are some hazards associated with asbestos exposure and safety precautions to take. First of all, we have respiratory problem. Inhalation of asbestos fibers is the most common route of exposure and poses significant respiratory hazards. Once airborne, asbestos fiber can be inhaled deep into the lungs where they may become lodged and cause inflammation, scarring and other respiratory issues. Long-term exposure to asbestos can lead to serious respiratory diseases such as asbestosis, lung cancer and mesothelioma. Secondary exposure risk. Family members and others who come into contact with individuals exposed to asbestos fiber can also be at risk through secondary exposure. This can occur when fibers are carried home on clothing, shoes or hair. Long latency period. Disease caused by asbestos exposure typically have a long latency period, meaning symptoms may not manifest until many years after initial exposure. This makes it challenging to identify and diagnose asbestos-related illnesses early. Fiber characteristics. Asbestos fibers are extremely durable and can remain suspended in the air for long periods. Once inhaled, these fibers can become lodged in the lungs and other tissues, causing inflammation and scarring over time. Increased risk in certain occupations. Workers in industries such as construction, shipbuilding, mining, and manufacturing are at higher risk of asbestos exposure due to prevalence of asbestos containing materials in their workplaces. Environmental contamination. Asbestos fibers released into the environment can contaminate soil, water, and air, posing risk to both human health and ecosystem. Asbestos containing material in the buildings and infrastructure can degrade over time, releasing fibers into the air, especially during renovation or demolition activities. Improper handling, disposal, or remediation of asbestos containing material can be exacerbate environmental contamination. Next is cancer risk. Asbestos exposure is strongly linked to an increased risk of developing various types of cancers, including lung cancer, mesothelioma. These cancers can develop years or even decades after exposure to asbestos fibers. Mesothelioma, in particular, is a rare and aggressive cancer that primarily affects the lining of lungs, abdomen, and other internal organs, and is almost exclusively caused by asbestos exposure. Asbestosis. Prolonged exposure to asbestos fibers can result in development of asbestosis, a chronic lung disease characterized by inflammation and scarring of lung tissues. Asbestosis can cause progressive shortness of breath, coughing, chest tightness, and ultimately respiratory failure. This condition typically develops after many years of heavy asbestos exposure. Other respiratory condition. In addition to asbestos and asbestos, exposure can lead to other respiratory conditions such as pleural plaques, pleural effusion, and diffuse pleural thickening. These conditions involve inflammation, scarring, or fluid accumulation in the pleura, the membrane lining the lungs and chest cavity, and can cause symptoms such as chest pain, difficulty in breathing, and coughing. It's crucial to take stringent precautions when working with or around asbestos containing materials. Proper training, proper protective equipment, and adherence to safety guidelines are essential to minimize the risk of asbestos exposure and its associated health consequences. Precautionary measures for dealing with asbestos are crucial to minimize the risk of exposure and protect health. Here's a detailed list of precautions to be considered. First of all, we have identify asbestos containing material. Conduct a thorough assessment to identify any material suspected of containing asbestos, especially in older buildings constructed before its ban. Samples should be analyzed by accredited laboratories. Risk assessment, evaluating the conditions of ACMs to determine whether they pose a risk of fiber release. Intact material in good condition may pose minimal risk of left if left undisturbed, while damaged or deteriorating material may require immediate action. limit access, restrict access to areas containing ACMs to prevent unnecessary exposure, use warning signs and barriers to indicate restricted zones. Workplace controls, implement engineering controls such as encapsulation, enclosure, or isolation to prevent the release of asbestos fiber into the air. These methods help contain asbestos and minimize exposure during maintenance or renovation activities. Safe work practices follow established procedure for handling removal and disposal of ACMs. Avoid actions that may disturb asbestos fibers such as drilling, cutting, sanding, or scraping unless absolutely necessary. Personal protective equipment. Provide workers with appropriate PPE including respirators with HEPA filters, disposable coveralls, gloves, and eye protection when working with or near ACMs. Ensure proper fit and training in PPE usage. Wet method and minimization of dust. Use wet methods, for example misting, to reduce the generation of dust during asbestos related tasks. Minimize the use of power tools that can create airborne particles. Vacuum and cleaning. Use high efficiency particulate air HEPA vacuum cleaners for cleaning surfaces contaminated with asbestos dust. Air monitoring. Conduct air monitoring before and during after asbestos related activities to assess airborne fiber levels. This helps ensure that exposure limits are not exceeded and that control measures are effective. Worker training and awareness. Provide comprehensive training to workers on hazards of asbestos exposure, safe work practices, and emergency procedures. Encourage open communication and reporting of potential asbestos related concerns. Regulatory compliance. Comply with relevant regulations, guidelines, and standards governing asbestos management and worker protection in your jurisdiction. Stay informed about updates and changes in asbestos regulation. Implementing these precautionary measures, individuals and organizations can effectively manage asbestos risk and protect the health and safety of workers and occupants. Regular monitoring and review of asbestos management particles practices are essential to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance with regulations.